Probably the most important and powerful mindset that can help you to handle the problems that you face is what we call the agency mindset. Now, the agency mindset is something that has actually been talked about or known for thousands of years, and it's provided some of the most important insights about how we could cope with the stress, the adversity, the challenge, the problems, the pain of life in a much more powerful way. In this episode of the Change Your Mind podcast, I'm going to walk you through how our understanding of the agency mindset has changed over the years. I'm going to explain exactly how you can start to implement it in your life. This is a mindset that I use every single day, many times a day. It keeps me sane. It keeps me strong. It allows me to deal with many of the challenges I face. And I cannot emphasize how important it is for us to start to ensure we're using it. Many of you will already be familiar with it, but I'm hoping by the end of this episode, you're going to see it in a very different light than you ever have before. So let's get stuck in and let's examine the agency mindset. Hello and welcome to another episode of the Change Your Minds podcast. My name is Owen Fitzpatrick, and today we're going to talk about my favorite mindset. I really think it's my favorite. I might say that about every other mindset, but this is certainly my favorite mindset in the practicality of how it actually helps me stay sane on a regular basis. And the notion of the agency mindset is the perception that we need to have over our own agency in any situation. The ability we have to be able to control whatever is going on, or to feel that perception of control. And so what I want to do is I want to walk you through some of the history behind this idea. This is not a new idea. This is not a brand new mindset. First of all, the notion of a mindset is that it's a set of beliefs about something that allows us to cope with that something more effectively. And so when we talk about an agency mindset, this way of looking at a particular event or challenge or experience of adversity, or indeed an experience of uncertainty, the agency mindset transforms the way in which we deal with it because it allocates our attention in a different way than we might ordinarily allocate it. And this is particularly important because so often our brains are hacked to a degree by the media, by social media, to continuously try to force us to feel fearful, to feel angry, to feel hate, to feel all sorts of feelings because of all of these things that we can do literally nothing about. And so what's imperative is that we start to turn this around and we recognize that we need more than ever now today to have full control over where our mind goes and what we decide to focus on. And so with that in mind, we really need to go back thousands of years for us to understand where this notion of the agency or the control mindset came about. Epictetus, the famous Stoic philosopher, talked about the importance of control. It was around a couple of thousand years ago, more or less, and he gave the idea of this locus of control. He didn't call it that, but he talked about this notion of embracing the fact that certain things are in our control and we need to focus on them, and certain things are outside of our control. There's the term, which is famous in Stoicism, called amor fati, which is trusting in fate or love of fate. And it's an important concept which sort of signifies this notion of you do the best you can in whatever situation you're facing. Marcus Aurelius as well, the famous emperor who was a big Stoic legend, in his book Meditations, which is from his sort of diaries, he talks about this notion as well. And so it's critical for us to recognize the power that we have over the situations we find ourselves in. Because indeed, whenever we focus on all the ways in which we can't control a situation, that can raise our stress levels quite significantly. Now, it wasn't just the Stoics, the Buddhists also, or the Buddhists, depending on if you're American or if you're not. I hear a lot of my American friends are like, Buddhist. So if you do Buddhism, and I know I say it in a funny way as if it's funny, and you're like, that's how it's supposed to be pronounced. Well, no, I say Buddhism, and I think that's how it's supposed to be pronounced. But look, I'm not in control over what you do, and you're not in control over what I do, so let's move on. Anyway, the point is that Buddhists would say that suffering comes from trying to control the uncontrollable, and that's one of the problems, is the whole notion of attachment, the four noble truths. Life is suffering, there's a cause of that suffering, there's an end to the suffering, and the end comes from the noble path and the importance of detachment, all that sort of stuff. And the idea that peace comes from accepting the impermanence of life, the fact that things will constantly change and we can't always get what we want. You can't always get what you want, but if you try sometimes, you get what you need. That famous Buddhist, Mick Jagger, I'm joking, he's not a Buddhist. Maybe he is, I don't think he is. Anyway, also, our agency lies in what we want to have happen, and we can control our intention or our action. We can't control the outcome, and we need to detach ourselves from the outcome. That was the whole Buddhist or the Buddhist perspective. Then we have in the 20th century, the famous serenity prayer. And that was a very famous serenity prayer that's used, I think, in AA meetings and whatnot. But it's a very beautiful way of describing the important skill that we're talking about today, the mindset we're talking about today, the ability to be able to know the difference between the things that are inside our control and outside, and to focus our attention on doing the things we need to do to control whatever we can control. And Julian Rotter, one of the key figures, or well-known figures in social learning theory in the 20th century, he introduced the idea of internal versus external locus of control. This is where psychology got into the deal here, and they started to talk about internal locus of control is when you believe that your actions shape outcomes, whereas external locus of control is the belief that outcomes depend on forces outside of you. And of course, this will change depending on what the outcomes are, but more often than not, depending on your internal locus of control or external locus of control will determine how you navigate your way through life. And obviously, if you're in a situation where you've got a very external locus of control, you got to cross your fingers and hope things work out in the way you want them to. If you've got a very internal locus of control, then you have to avoid blaming yourself for everything that can possibly go wrong. Sometimes people, especially people who are into manifestation and all that sort of stuff, and I attract everything into my life, they worry if they've ever thought a negative thought and, oh my goodness, the reason all these bad things have happened is because I've thought that way. No. But the key is that we need to recognize that understanding our locus of control, how much control we give to ourselves in dealing with any of the challenges or problems or successes that we want to have in our life, that is something we need to start to audit or look at ourselves as well. There's also the work of CBT, Albert Ellis and Aaron Beck, cognitive behavioral therapy, rational emotive therapy, looking at how we can control the interpretations we give to events as opposed to the events themselves. Obviously, in the field of NLP or neuro-linguistic programming, we need to take responsibility for the way in which we communicate. It's not enough just to get the words out. We need to recognize that it's about the impact we can make and we can influence that. And therein lies a sort of something that hasn't been mentioned that much, is the difference between control and influence. And control is when you can fully control an outcome, and influence is something that you can't fully control, but you can increase the probability of it happening in your way. And indeed, I think it was in Stephen Covey's book, The 7 Habits of Highly Effective People, wonderful book. He talks about the circle of concern and the circle of influence. And what he does is he draws a circle and puts in every single thing that you are stressed about or worried about, everything that makes you feel bad, everything that you're worried about in your life. And then you draw a circle of influence. And what you do is you draw it around everything. You want to make sure that everything inside of that circle are the actual things that you can do something about. And what happens is if you've got a very small circle of influence inside of a big circle of concern, so there's a lot of things in your circle of concern, a lot of things you're worried about that you can't actually influence, well, that's going to be a recipe for disaster. Whereas on the other hand, if in your circle of concern, you've got like 15 things and 14 of them are things that you can influence, you're on the right track, right? You're on a great track, actually. So the idea is with the circle of concern and the circle of influence, you're trying to make it so that most of the things you concern yourself with are the things that you can actually do something about. Now, all of this is sort of an example of some of the historical context, but I want to talk to you about how I find this particularly useful. And the way in which I use this is I focus, first of all, on putting things into three main buckets. And the first bucket are things that we can control. And usually this means we can control how well we prepare. We can control the actions that we take. We can control our mindset. We can control our attitude. We can control how organized we are. So there's lots of stuff we can fully control. And we first focus in any situation you find yourself in, you go, okay, so what can we actually control in this situation? The second question is, what is it that we can't control, but we can influence? And this is, maybe it's people that we can influence, or by me really working hard to perform at my best, that's going to influence the outcome. So it's not just about influencing people, it's also influencing outcomes, but is what are all the things that we can do to increase the likelihood, to increase the probability that we'll get a result? It won't guarantee it, but increases the probability. So you first of all have a list of actions that you need to take that will help you to control whatever you can control. Then you've got a list of all the actions you can take that will influence the situation that you want to influence. And then finally, you've the third category, which are the things that are outside of your control. And these are the things that you have to do, well, one of two things with. Originally, I always talked about the one thing that you need to do here is you just need to learn to accept it. So you accept what's outside of your control. And indeed, for many of the things outside of your control, you have to accept it. But there's something else there as well. And this is something that I've only really thought about quite recently, but it's something that I use now all the time, and it helps me to be able to plug a gap that I always saw in this notion. It's like you control, you influence, or you accept. But what if you're in a situation that what you have to accept is so difficult for you? And for that, I think there's a fourth category or a subcategory of this acceptance piece, which is you also trust in something else. So you trust in the future. You trust in people. You trust in God. Like, let me give you an example. If you're in a situation that you're sick, you go to the doctor and you don't know what's wrong with you, you have to accept the fact that you're sick. You control what you can control in terms of your health. You influence what you can influence. You get in front of the doctor, but at a certain point, you then have to trust in the medical system, trust in the doctor, that they will help you to be able to figure out what this is and help you to get well. You have to trust in other people. Or maybe you might go to mass, or you might go to church, or you might go to the mosque. You pray. And by praying, you are looking again for help. And when you pray, you're fundamentally looking for something outside of you. It's the ability that we have to have faith or believe in other people, believe in God, believe in the future, any of those options. It's just having something to go, everything is going to be okay, or we will get through this. There is light at the end of the tunnel. That is crucial. We need to be able to see some sort of possible future where things will be okay again. When we do so, then sometimes we need to accept, but we can accept, but also know that one day this will pass. One day we will be through this, the other side of this. And to me, that's also something that could be very, very helpful in organizing ourselves in the best possible way. So you've got the bucket of what are the things you can control. There's the things that are under your influence. There's the things outside of your control, which could be anything from the government to policy decisions to health ailments to bad luck to circumstances, all that sort of stuff. But then there's the things that we need to think through. Okay, so imagine in the future, when all this is over, how might things be? You're moving to what I call a future presence. You're believing in a future, believing in someone else helping you, believing in God, believing that things can be better. That's what you're looking to do in this final piece. And there's one other aspect of this whole notion of an agency mindset that I want to get to. And that's, for years as a therapist, I'd work with people that would come in and they generally speak and have one of two types of stories they would tell. The first type of story would be, they would be the victims of their own problem. So they would say, the reason for my problem is because of the world, because of everybody else, because of blah, blah, blah. Whereas other folks would have what I call the villain story. And this would be people that believe I'm my own worst enemy, I ruin everything, I'm the victim of myself. So they were both victims, but one was the villain and the victim, the other was just the victim. But either way, my job as a therapist was to help them to become heroes. Because a hero might start as a victim or start as a villain, but they overcome and they're able to become the hero. But the way they overcome it, largely a big part of how a hero becomes a hero, or a large part of how a victim turns into a hero or a villain turns into a hero, is through agency. They learn what they can do. They focus on what they can control and what they can influence in order to overcome the monster, to overcome the dragon, to overcome the difficulty. And so a large part of my work as a therapist was empowering the folks I would work with so that they could believe I could become a hero. I can overcome this. And once I focus on what I can control and influence, then I can start the journey from where I am as a victim to where I need to be, which is the hero. From where I am as the villain to where I need to be as the hero. So you become a hero by taking agency. It's one of the single most powerful things that can help people to transform their lives. And indeed, I would suggest it's an absolute necessity when it comes to any therapy or when it comes to any form of coaching. You need to believe in your capacity to be able to overcome the demons of your past, the issues that you're facing. And once you believe in your own capacity to have control, to have influence over whatever you can influence and control, that allows you to move forward. That allows you to take the steps you need to take to be able to increase the likelihood that you are, in fact, going to succeed and going to get to where you need to get to. So again, embracing the hero mindset is akin to cultivating this agency mindset that we're talking about. So I hope you found this useful. I hope that the agency mindset is something you practice. Again, it's simply about what can I fully control here? What's under my influence? What's outside of my control? And believing that one day everything's going to be okay. Right? Having faith or trust in the people that can help you to get where you need to get to, or trust in God, or trust in the future, whatever floats your boat. And then recognizing the stories that we tell ourselves about ourselves. Are you telling yourself stories about how you're the victim of this and that? Are you telling your stories about how you're the villain? And then finding out how can you tell yourself a new story where you might start as the victim or the villain, but then you learn how you can start to make changes and you start to move forward, become the hero of your own life. So there you have it. Thanks so much for watching. Please leave us a comment if you found this useful. And for now, take care, be well. May the forces always be with you. May you know the force inside of you and you take control and influence over the force inside of you. And may you cope with and deal with the challenges that you find yourself facing. But for now, take care, be well, and I'll see you soon. Bye for now.